There is something you do almost every day that you have never once questioned. You apologize before you even open your mouth. You figure things out alone, not because you enjoy it, but because asking for help feels like something is fundamentally wrong with you for needing it in the first place. You watch other people laugh freely, make decisions easily, and let others take care of them, and somewhere deep inside, you wonder why none of that feels natural to you. You are not anxious. You are not difficult. You are not too much, but something in your nervous system is running a very old program. And today, we are going to trace it back to its source. Chapter 1. The Invisible Wound. Most people understand trauma as something loud, an accident, a violent argument, a moment that left a visible scar. But there is a category of psychological injury that leaves no visible evidence at all because it was never about what happened to you. It was about what consistently did not happen. Childhood emotional neglect, sometimes called CEN in clinical psychology, is the chronic absence of emotional attunement between a parent and a child. Not abuse, not cruelty, just absence. A parent who was physically there but emotionally unreachable. A household where feelings were treated as inconvenient, dramatic, or simply invisible. And here is what makes this so difficult to recognize. You adapted so completely, so quietly, that the adaptations themselves began to look like personality traits. People praise you for being independent. They admire how easygoing you are. They call you the strong one. What they cannot see, and what you may not have been able to see either, is that those traits are not your natural character. They are a survival system that your child brain built out of necessity. Think about what it means to grow up in a home where your emotional needs consistently meet a wall. You cry and no one comes. You are excited about something and the room stays flat. You are scared and you are told you are being dramatic. Over time, your developing brain performs a calculation that feels like logic. Emotions are useless. Needs create disappointment. The safest way to exist is to become invisible. And so you build a version of yourself designed to take up as little space as possible. But that version of yourself is still running today in your relationships, in your decisions, and in the way you talk to yourself when no one else is listening. Chapter 2. You are not broken. You are brilliant. Before we go any further, it is important to say something clearly. None of this is a character flaw. Not the hyper-independence, not the apologizing, not the difficulty knowing what you actually feel. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of intelligence, the intelligence of a child who had to solve a problem that no child should ever have to solve. Developmental psychologists describe this as an adaptive coping strategy. When a child's environment does not provide the emotional scaffolding they need, the brain does not simply give up, it rewires. It builds internal structures to compensate for what is missing externally. The child essentially becomes their own emotional manager, support system, and self-regulator, all before their prefrontal cortex has even finished forming. That is remarkable. That took intelligence, sensitivity, and effort. The problem is not that you built these strategies. The problem is that the strategies never got updated. You are still running code that was written for a very specific, very limited environment, and that environment no longer exists. Here is the part that most people miss, and it is the part that changes everything. The habits we are about to walk through are not random. They are not quirks. Each one traces back to a specific psychological mechanism. And once you can see that mechanism clearly, it loses its power over you. So stay with this, because what comes next is not just information. It is a map. Chapter 3. How the brain learns to disappear. Let us talk about what is actually happening in the brain. When a child repeatedly reaches out for emotional connection and receives nothing, not rejection, just absence, the brain's threat detection system, centered in the amygdala, encodes a specific lesson. Vulnerability leads to pain. The more consistent that lesson, the deeper it becomes embedded in the neural pathways governing behavior. Think of it this way. Imagine you are walking to work and you take the same path every morning for years. Over time, that path becomes a groove. The grass wears down. The dirt compresses. It becomes the default route, not because it is the best route, but because it is the most worn one. That is roughly what repeated emotional experiences do to neural pathways. The brain does not ask whether the habit is still useful. It just follows the groove. Here is the mental model. Picture a thermostat. A thermostat is designed to maintain a set temperature, not the ideal temperature, but the familiar one. If your emotional environment growing up was set to emotional distance and self-sufficiency, your nervous system calibrated itself to that temperature. As an adult, when genuine warmth and connection show up, it does not feel like relief. It feels like a malfunction, something to be corrected, and your system quietly turns the dial back to cold. This is why intimacy can feel threatening even when you consciously want it. It is why you pull back just as things start to feel real. It is not self-sabotage in the dramatic sense. It is homeostasis, your nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. There is also a second mechanism at play: interoceptive disconnection. Interoception is the brain's ability to read and interpret signals from inside your own body: hunger, fatigue, emotion. In children who were emotionally neglected, this system often goes quiet because there was no external mirror to validate what the body was feeling. The sensations existed, but they were never named, never witnessed, never confirmed as real. Over time, the brain stops paying close attention to them. As an adult, this shows up as a strange flatness, a sense that other people feel things more deeply than you do, or that you experience life from behind glass. You are not numb by nature. The channel simply got turned down so many years ago that you stopped noticing it was there. Chapter 4. 5 Principles for Rewiring. Healing from emotional neglect is not about fixing what is broken. It is about teaching your nervous system that the old rules no longer apply. Here are 5 principles grounded in how the brain actually changes. The first principle is emotional labeling. Neuroscience refers to this as affect labeling. When you identify and name what you are feeling even silently, even approximately, it measurably reduces activation in the amygdala. You do not need to feel the emotion fully. You just need to notice it. In daily life, this means pausing when something happens and asking, quietly, what is this? Not what should I do, but what is this feeling in my chest right now? Start vague, something tight, something flat. Over time, the resolution improves. The second principle is tolerating the discomfort of being helped. This is not about gratitude or learning to accept compliments gracefully. This is about neurological exposure therapy. Every time you allow someone to help you carry a box, hold a door, listen to a hard day, and you sit with the discomfort instead of deflecting it, you are sending a new signal to your threat system. The signal is, this is safe. You will not always believe it. That is fine. Belief comes after the behavior, not before. The third principle is the pause before the apology. The apologizing reflex is automatic. It fires before conscious thought. The goal is not to eliminate apologies. It is to introduce a one-breath gap between the impulse and the words. In that gap, you ask, did I actually do something wrong? Or am I just apologizing for existing? This rewires the reflex over time because you are inserting conscious evaluation into an automatic response loop. Even doing this once a day creates measurable change in habitual behavior patterns. The fourth principle is preference practice. In attachment research, a child's sense of self is formed through a process called mirroring, having their preferences, reactions, and experiences reflected back as valid. If that did not happen for you, your sense of self is thin in certain areas. You rebuild it the same way it should have formed, through small, repeated acts of choosing. What do you want for dinner tonight? Which route do you prefer? These feel trivial. They are not. Each small preference expressed is a vote for a version of yourself that is allowed to exist. The fifth principle is the distinction between solitude and isolation. Many people who experienced emotional neglect retreat when life gets hard, not because they are introverts, but because connection was never coded as a source of relief. The goal is not to force yourself into vulnerability. The goal is to begin to notice the difference between choosing to be alone and automatically disappearing because reaching out never felt like an option. That awareness alone shifts something. Chapter 5. The model you can carry with you. Here is the single mental model that holds all of this together. Think of emotional neglect not as damage, but as a missing installation. When a child grows up with consistent emotional attunement, They receive a kind of internal software. They learn how to name feelings, how to ask for help, how to trust that their presence is welcome, how to know what they want. That software gets installed through thousands of small interactions across years of childhood. If those interactions did not happen, the software was never installed. Not deleted, not corrupted, simply never there. And the extraordinary thing about the brain is that installation can happen later. It is slower. It requires more intentional repetition. But the same pathways that were built in childhood can be gradually reshaped through consistent new experience. This is what neuroplasticity actually means in practice. Not that the brain changes dramatically, but that it updates slowly given the right conditions. The habits we talked about, the hyper-independence, the apologies, the emotional flatness, the constant second-guessing, they are not who you are. They are placeholders. They were doing a job. And with time, and with the kind of deliberate attention we have walked through today, something else can take their place. There is a child somewhere inside you who learned to be very, very quiet, who learned that needing something was dangerous, who figured out early and alone that the safest way to exist was to stop taking up space. That child was not wrong to learn those things. The environment required it. The brain did what it always does. It adapted to keep you alive. But you are not in that environment anymore. And the quiet that once protected you is no longer protecting you. It is just keeping you small. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to not know how you feel and say so. You are allowed to ask for help and find out, maybe for the first time, that someone actually shows up. It starts smaller than you think, a preference stated out loud. An apology withheld, a door held open that you actually walk through. The brain follows the behavior, and slowly, the groove changes. You were always worth noticing. It is time to start believing that, not as a concept, but as something you let yourself feel.